ॐ ब्रह्मानन्दं परमसुखदं केवलं ज्ञानमूर्तिम् द्वन्द्वातीतं गगनसदृशं तत्त्वमसि आदिलक्ष्यम् एकं नित्यं विमलमचलं सर्वधी साक्षिभूतं भावतीतं त्रिगुणरहितं सद्गुरुं तं नमामि. Shivoham friends. So today we will be discussing chapter 113, that is description of ignorance and delusion onwards of third book Utpatti Khand, that is delusion means Avidya, and Vasishtha is saying about it that false desires that continually rise in the heart are like the appearances of false moons in the sky and should be shunned by the wise. They rise in the minds of the universe of the unwise and amidst their ignorance. Everything that is known only by its name and not in actuality cannot reside in the minds of wise people. Here is saying, for in the mind of wise people, the things which exist only in the name and not in actuality, such things cannot reside. Be wise, O Ram, and do not think like an ignorant. Consider well all that I tell you. There is no second moon in the sky, but it appears so only by deception of our optical visions. There exists nothing real or unreal anywhere except the only true essence of God. Just like there is no substantiality in the continuity of the waves other than the body of waters, there is no reality in anything, whether existent or non-existent, all which are mere creations of your shadowy ideality. Therefore, do not impute any shape or figure to the eternal, boundless, and pure Spirit of God. You are no maker or master of anything. Then why consider any act or thing as your own? You do not know what these existences are, or by whom and from what they are made. Do not think you are an actor, because no actor can attempt to do anything. Discharge whatever is your duty and remain at your ease, with having done your part. Though you are the actor of an action, don't think of yourself as such. Mind your inability to do or undo anything. How can you boast of being the actor when you know your inability for action? If truth is delectable and untruth is odious, then remain firm to what is good and be employed in your duties. But as the whole world is a gallery, a magic and an unreality, then say what reliance is there in it, and what signifies pleasure or displeasure to anybody? No, Ram, this egg of the world is a delusion, and being non-existent in itself, it appears as a real existence to others. Know these busy sphere of the world, so full with its non-existence, to be an idle fantasy presented for the delusion of our minds. It is like a beautiful bamboo plant, all hollow within and without pith or marrow inside, or like the curling waves of the sea, both of which are born to perish without being uprooted from the bottom. This world is as evaporated as the air, and water flying in the air, incapable of being touched or held in the hand, and as precipitous as a waterfall in its course. It appears as a flowery garden, but never comes to any good use at all. The billowy sea in the mirage present the form of water without quenching our thirst. Sometimes it seems to be straight and at others a curve. Now it is long and now short and now it is moving and quiet again. Everything in it, though originally for our good, conspires to our evil only. Though hollow inside, the world appears to be full with its apparent contents. Though all the words are continually in motion, yet they seem to be standing still. Whether they be dull matter or intelligences, their existence depends upon their motion. And these, without stopping anywhere for a moment, present the sight of their being quite at rest. Though they are as bright as light to sight, they are as opaque in their bowels as the dark core. Though they are moved by a superior power, they appear to be moving of themselves. They fade away before the brighter light of the sun, but brighten in the darkness of the night. Their light is like that of a mirage, created by the reflection of sunbeams. Human greed is like a black serpent, crude and venomous, thin and soft in its form, but rough and dangerous in its nature, and ever unsteady as a woman. I'm sorry, but it is written here, it's unsteady as a woman. Without the objects of our affection, our love of the world soon ceases. Like the lamp is extinguished without its oil, and as the vermilion mark is soon worn off, our false hopes are as transient as the impermanent flashes of lightning. Hopes glare and flare for a moment, then disappear in the air like these transitory flashes of light. The objects of our desire are often had without our seeking, but they are as frail as the fire of heaven. They appear to vanish like twinkling lightning, and being held carefully in the hand, they burn it like an electric fire. Many things come to us unasked, and though appearing delightful at first, they prove troublesome to us at last. Hopes delayed are like flowers growing out of season, which neither hear their fruit or answer our purposes. Every accident tends to our misery, as unpleasant dreams annoy our sleep and disturb our rest. It is our delusion that presents these many and big worlds before us. Just like our dreams produce, sustain, and destroy all appearances of vision in 1 minute. It was a delusion that made 1 minute appear as many years to King Lavana, and the space of one night seemed like the long period of a dozen of years to Harishchandra. Such also is the case with separated lovers among rich people, that in the absence of their beloved, a single night seems like an entire year to them. It is the delusive Avidya that shortens the flight of time to the rich and happy and prolongs its course with the poor and miserable, all of whom are subject to power of delusion. The power of this delusion is essentially spread all over the works of creation. Like the light of a lamp spreads over things in its brightness and not in substance. As a female form represented in a picture is no woman and has no power to do anything, so this delusion that presents us the shapes of our desired objects in the picture of the mind can produce nothing in reality. The delusion consists in building aerial castles without substance in the mind. Though these appears in hundreds and thousands of shapes, they have no substance to them. It deludes the ignorant like a mirage misleads deer in a desert. The delusion consists in building aerial castles without substance in the mind. Though these appear in hundreds and thousands of shapes. They have no substance to them. It deludes the ignorant like a mirage misleads a deer in a desert. But false appearances cannot deceive the knowing man. These appearances, like foaming waters, are as continuous as they are impermanent. They are as fleeting as the driving frost that cannot be held in the hand. This delusion holds the world in its grasp and flies aloft with it in the air. It blinds us like flying dust raised by its furious blast. Covered with dust and with heat and sweat of its body, it grasps the earth and flies all about the earthward. The deluded man ever works with persistence and runs everywhere after his greed. As drops of rainwater falling from the clouds form the great rivers and seas, and as scattered straw tied together make a strong rope to bind beasts. So the combination of all the delusive objects in the world makes the great delusion of reality and lust. Poets describe the fluctuations of the world as a series of waves, and the world itself as a bed of lotuses, pleasant to sight but floating on an unstable element. But I compare it to the porous stalk of the lotus, full of perforations and openings inside, and to a pool of mud and mire with the filth of our sins. Men think much of their improvement and of many other things on earth, but there is no improvement in this decaying world. That is like a tempting cake with a coating of sweets, but full of deadly gall within. It is like a lamp whose flame is lost and fled, we know not where. It is visible as mist, but try to lay hold on it, and it proves to be nothing. This earth is a handful of ashes, which being flung aloft flies in particles of dust. It is like the upper sky, which appears to be blue but has no blueness in it. This delusion of on earth is like the appearance of two moons in the sky, or in the vision of things in a dream, or in the motion of immovable things on the land to the passenger in a boat. Man, being, being long deluded by this air, which has tightly laid hold of their minds, imagine a long duration of the world, as they do of the scenes in their dreams. The mind, being thus deluded by this error, sees the wonderful production of world to rise and fall within itself like the waves of the sea. Things which are real and good appear otherwise in our error, while those that are unreal and harmful appear real and good to our deluded understandings. Our strong greed, riding on the vehicle of the desired object, chases the fleeting mind as bird catchers chase flying birds with nets. Delusion, like a mother and wife, often offers us flash delights with her tender looks and breast distilling sweet milk. But these delights serve only to poison us, while they soon to cool the worlds with their distillation, just like the crescent orb of the moon injures us with too much of her moistening influence, while it appears to refresh us with her full bright beams. Blind delusion turns meek, mild, and mute men into giddy and clamorous fools, like silent Vetal ghosts in their dancing revelry in the silent woods at night. It is under the influence of delusion that with shapes of snakes and serpents in our brick built and stone made houses at night. It makes a single thing appear as double, like the sight of two moons in the sky, and brings near to us what is far away, like in our dreams. Delusion even causes us to dream that we are dead. It causes long to appear as short, as our nightly sleep shortens the duration of time and makes a moment appear as a year. And in the case of separated lovers, as in the case of separated lovers, for them also time becomes very elongated. Look at the power of this unsubstantial ignorance, a negative thing, and still there is nothing which it cannot alter to something else. Therefore, be diligent to stop the course of this delusion by your right knowledge, just as they dry up a channel by stopping the current of the stream. Ramji said, "It is wonderful that a false conception that has no real existence and is so delicate as almost a nothing should thus blind the understanding. It is strange that something without form or figure, without sense or understanding, and which is unreal and vanishing, should so blindfold the world. It is strange that a thing is sparkling in darkness and vanishing in daylight, and short-sighted as the brooding owl, should keep the world in darkness. It is strange that something prone to doing evil and unable to come to light and flying from sight and having no bodily form whatever should thus darken the world. It is a wonder that one acting so miserably and consorting with mean and vile and ever hiding herself in darkness should thus dominate the world. It is wonderful that fallacy, attended with constant sorrow and peril, and which is devoid of sense and knowledge, should keep the world in darkness. It is to be wondered that error arising from danger and greed, creeping crookedly in darkness, and liable to instant death, should yet keep the world in blindness. It is surprising that error, which is a blind, dull, and stupid thing itself, and which is falsely talkative at all the times, should yet mislead others in the world. It is astonishing that falsehood should betray a man after attaching as closely to him as his consort, and showing all her endearments to him, but flying at the approach of his reason. It is strange that man should be blinded by the womanish attire of error, which beguiles the man but dares not to look at him face to face. It is strange that man is blinded by his faithless consort of error, which has no sense or intelligence, and which dies away without being killed. Tell me, sage, how this error, which has its seat in the desires and is deeply rooted in the recesses of the mind and heart, and leads us to the channels of endless misery by subjecting us to repeated births and deaths and to the pains and pleasures of life, is to be dispelled. And with this question from Lord Ram, the chapter 113 comes to an end. And in chapter 114 again, description of error is there. Ramji again repeated, "Tell me, sage, how to remove this stony blindness of man caused by the trick of ignorance?" Now Vasishtha replies, "As the particles of snow melt at the sight of the sun, so this ignorance is dispelled immediately by a glance of the Supreme Spirit. Until then, ignorance continues to hull down the soul and spirit, as from a precipice to the depths of the world, and expose them to sorrows as thick as thorny brambles. As long as the desire of seeing spirit doesn't rise of itself in the human soul, there is no end of this ignorance and unconsciousness. The sight of the Supreme Spirit destroys the knowledge of our self-existence that is caused by our ignorance, just like the light of the sun destroys the shadows of things. The sight of the all-pervading God dispels our ignorance in the same manner as the light of the 12 zodiacal suns puts the shadows of night to flight from all sides of the horizon. Our desires are the offsprings of our ignorance, and the annihilation of these constitutes what we call our liberation. A man who is devoid of desires is reckoned the perfect and consummate master or siddha. As the night shade of desires is dissipated from the region of the mind, the darkness of ignorance is put to flight by the rise of the intellectual sun. As the dark night flies away before the advance of sunlight, so ignorance disappears before the advance of true knowledge, to which we call vivek or discrimination as well. The stiffness of our desires tends to bind the mind fast in its worldly chains. Like the advance of night serves to increase the fears of demon in the children. Now again, Ramji asks, the knowledge of phenomena as true makes what we call avidya or ignorance, and it is said to be dispersed by the spiritual knowledge. Now tell me, sage, what is the nature of the spirit? Vasishtha replied, that which is not the subject of thought, which is all pervasive, and the thought of which is beyond expression and comprehension is the universal spirit. That which reaches to the highest heaven of God and stretches over the lowest plots of grass on earth is the all-pervading spirit at all times and is unknown to the ignorant soul. All this is truly Brahman, eternal and imperishable consciousness. To him, no imagination of the mind can reach at any time. That which is never born or dead, and which is ever existent in all worlds, and in which the conditions of being and change are altogether wanting, which is one and one alone, all and all pervading, and imperishable unity, which is incomprehensible in thought, and is the only form of the intellect, is the universal spirit. It is accompanied with the ever existent, all extending, pure and undisturbed consciousness, and is that calm, quiet, even and unchanging state of the soul which is called the divine spirit. There resides also the impure mind, which is by nature beyond all physical objects and runs after its own desire. It is conceivable by consciousness as sullied by its own activity. This ubiquitous, all-potent, great and godlike mind in its imagination separates itself from the Supreme Spirit and rises from it like a wave on the surface of the sea. There is no fluctuation or projection in the all-extending tranquil soul of God, but these take place in the mind, owing to its desires, which cause the production of all things in the world. Therefore, the world, being the production of our desire or will, has its extinction with the privation of desires. For that which is the growth of a thing causes its extinction also. Like the wind that kindles the fire also extinguishes it. The exertion of human effort gives rise to the expectations of results, but lack of desire causes the cessation of exertions and consequently put a stop to the desire of activity and our ignorance that causes desire. The thought that I am distinct from Brahman binds the mind to the world, but the belief that Brahman is all releases the mind from its bondage. Every thought about oneself fastens his bondage in this world, but release from selfish thoughts leads him to his liberation. Cease from your selfish cares, and you shall cease to work with persistence for nothing. There is no lake of lotuses in the sky, nor is there a lotus growing in the gold mine, whose fragrance fills the air and attracts the blue bees to suck its honey. The goddess of ignorance, with her uplifted arms resembling the long stalks of lotus plants, laughs over her conquest in exultation with the glaring light of shining moonbeams. Such is the net of our wishes that our minds spread before us, which represent unrealities as real and take a delight to dwell upon them, like children in their toys. So also is the trap spread out by our own ignorance all over this world. It ensnares busy people to their misery in all places, just as it tightly binds ignorant men and children in its chains. Men are busy with worldly affairs, with such thoughts as, I am poor and bound in this earth for my life, but I have my minds and feet with which I must work for myself. But they are freed from all affairs of this life, who know themselves as spiritual beings, and that their spiritual part is neither subject to bondage nor labor. The thought that I am neither flesh or bones, but something other than my body, releases one from this bondage. One having such assurance within is said to have weakened his avidya or ignorance. The imagination of early men paint ignorance as dark as the darkness that surrounds the highest pinnacle of Mount Meru, blazing with the blue light of sapphire, or at the primeval darkness impenetrable by the sunlight. Earthborn mortals also represent ignorance as the blackness which naturally covers the face of heaven by its own nature, like the blue vault of the sky. Thus, in the imagination of the unenlightened, ignorance is pictured with a visible form, but the enlightened never attribute qualities of physical sensation to inanimate and imaginary objects. Then Ramji said, tell me, sage, what is the cause of the blueness of the sky, if it is not the reflection of the blue gems on the Meru's peak? Is it a collection of darkness by itself? Why the color of sky is blue is now being replied by Vasishtha Maharaj. Ram, the sky being only an empty vacuum cannot have the quality of blueness, which is commonly attributed to it, nor is it the bluish luster of the blue gems that are supposed to abound on the top of Meru, nor is there any possibility of a body of darkness abiding in the sky when the cosmic egg is full of light, and when the nature of light is the brightness that stretches over the extraterrestrial regions. O fortunate Ram, the sky, which is a vast vacuum, is open to a sister of ignorance with regard to its inner hollowness. As one after losing his eyesight sees only darkness all about him, so the lack of objects of sights in the warm of emptiness gives the sky the appearance of a dark scene. By understanding this, as you come to the knowledge that the apparent blackness of the sky is no black color of its own, so you come to learn the seeing darkness of ignorance to be no darkness in reality. Want of desire or its detachment is the destroyer of ignorance. It is as easy to effect it as to annihilate a lake of lotuses growing in the sky. It is better, O good Ram, to distrust the delusions of this world and disbelieve the blueness of the sky than to labor under the error of their reality. The thought that I am dead makes one as sad as when he dreams of his death in sleep. Similarly, the thought that I am living makes one as cheerful as when he wakes from the deadly dream of his death like sleep. Foolish imaginations make the mind as dull as that of a fool, but reasonable reflections lead it to wisdom and clear sightedness. A moment's reflection of the reality of the world and of his own essence casts a man into the gloom of everlasting ignorance, while his forgetfulness of these removes all mortal thoughts from his mind. Ignorance produces passions and temptations for all transient objects. Ignorance is busy destroying the knowledge of the soul. It is destroyed only by the knowledge of the soul. Whatever the mind seeks is instantly supplied by the organs of action, which serve as ministers subservient to the orders of the king. Therefore, he who by his diligent application to spirituality doesn't attend to the dictates of his mind in the pursuit of phenomena entertains the tranquility of his inmost soul. What didn't exist at first has no existence even now. That which appears as existent is nothing other than the quiescent and immaculate essence Brahma himself. Let no other thought of any person, thing, place, or object employ your mind at any time, except that of the immutable, everlasting, and unlimited Spirit of Brahma. Rely upon the superior powers of your understanding, exert your sovereign intellect, and root out all worldly desires by enjoyment of the pleasures of your mind. The great ignorance that rises in the mind and raises the desires of your heart has spread the net of your false hopes for your ruin, causing your death and decrepitude under them. Your wishes burst out in expressions such as, these are my sons and these are my treasures. I am such a one and these things are mine. All this is the effect of a magic spell of ignorance that binds you tightly. A body is a void in which your desires have produced all your selfish thoughts, like empty winds raising waves on the surface of the sea. Learn, you who are the seekers of truth, that the words I and mine and this and that are all meaningless in their true sense. There is nothing that may be called a real at any time except knowledge of the true self and essence of Brahma. Essence of Brahma. The heavens above and the earth below, with all the ranges of hills and mountains on earth, and all the lines of its rivers and lakes, are only the dissolving sights, seen in the same or different lights, as they are represented by our ignorance. Phenomena rise to view from our ignorance and disappear before the light of knowledge. They appear in various forms in the substratum of the soul, just as the fallacy of a snake appears in the substance of a rope. Ram, know that only the ignorant are liable to the error of taking the earth, sun, and stars for realities. Not so to the learned, to whom the great Brahman is present in all his majesty and full glory in all places and things. While the ignorant labor under the doubt of two ideas, a rope and a snake in the rope, the learned are firm in their belief and sight of one true God in all things. Therefore, do not think like the ignorant, but well consider all things like the wise and the learned. Forsake your earthly wishes and don't grow up like the vulgar by believing the not self to be the self. Of what good is this dull and dumb body to you, Ram, that you are so overcome by alternating joy and grief at its pleasure and pain? Like the wood of a tree, its gum resin and its fruit and seeds are not one and the same thing, though they are so closely related to one another. So this body and embodied beings are quite separate from one another, though they are so closely united with each other. As the burning of a pair of bellows doesn't blow out the fire or stop the air blown by another pair, so the vital air is not destroyed by the destruction of the body, but finds its way into another form and frame elsewhere. The thought that I am happy or miserable is a false, as the idea of water in mirage. Knowing it as such, give up your misconceptions of pleasure and pain and place your reliance upon the sole truth. Oh, how wonderful is it that men have so utterly forgotten the true Brahman and have placed their reliance on false ignorance, the sole cause of errors. Don't, O Ram, give way to ignorance in your mind, which being overspread by its darkness will render it difficult for you to pass over the errors of the world. Know ignorance to be false, fiend, and deluder of the strongest mind. It is the baneful cause of endless sorrows and produces the poisonous fruits of illusion. It imagines hellfire in the cooling beams of the watery orb of the moon. Ignorance conceives the torments of infernal fires proceeding from the refreshing beams of that celestial light. It views a dry desert in wide waters, rolling with waves and undulating with the fragrance of the aqueous kelp flowers. It imagines a dry mirage in the empty clouds of autumn. Ignorance builds imaginary castles in empty air and causes the air of rising and falling towers in clouds. It is the delusion of our fancy that makes us feel the emotions of pleasure and pain in our dreams. If the mind is not filled and led away by worldly desires, then there is no fear of falling into the dangers that the daydreams of our earthly affairs constantly present before us. The more our false knowledge lays hold of our minds, the more we feel the torments of hell and its punishments in us, like nightmares in sleep. The mind, pierced by error, as if by the thorny stalk of a lotus, sees the whole world revolving before it, like the sea rolling with its waves. Ignorance takes possession of the mind, converts enthroned princes to peasants, and reduces them to a condition worse than that of a beastly hunters. Therefore, O Ram, give up the earthly desires that serve at best to bind down the soul to this mortal earth and its mortifying cares. Remain like the pure white crystal, reflecting the colors of all things around in your stainless mind. Employ your mind to your duties without being tarnished by your attachment to any. Remain like the unsullied crystal, receiving the reflections of outward objects without being stained by any. knowing everything with eagerness in your watchful mind, and performing all your duties with due submission, and stay away from the common track with your exalted mind, you will raise yourself above comparison with any other person. With this instruction from Vasishtha to Lord Ram, this chapter 114 comes to an end, and along with it comes to the end this session of today's. And by the Lord Ram's grace, today's session is completed, and we will again meet tomorrow to continue our reading of further chapters in this book, Utpatti Khand. Until then, friends, Shivoham. Will meet again tomorrow.